step to do to deal with such misdiagnosis. So, for example, if your general practitioner misdiagnosed you, one must understand where he got that from. And if it is ultimately the testing authority would then be liable, or whoever conducted the test, for the damages to you that resulted from that misdiagnosis. And naturally, you'd have recourse to the medical council for lodging a complaint. But if you want to recoup your damages, you'll have to approach the courts and look to what exactly are your damages and who caused them.
And what about in a case where the deceased was told that they passed away of COVID-19 when in fact it wasn't actually COVID-19?
The difficulty with that one is that what are the consequences? Naturally, you can lodge the complaint with the medical council and you can lodge the complaint with the authorities and you can try to get the death certificate amended and you can bring the requisite applications to the Department of Home Affairs. That is quite a relevant circumstance and does appear to be happening quite often these days, that people are getting death certificates claiming the cause of death is COVID-19, when COVID-19 is either a contributing cause, or they merely just tested positive of COVID-19, or they had nothing to do with COVID-19 and merely had some other form of complaint which caused their death. Now, if there are consequences to that death certificate, for example, you lose out on an insurance policy or there's a non-payout, obviously there are damages to be collected. If for your own peace of mind, you just want the death certificate amended, then Home Affairs is the good start in bringing the requisite applications and procedures to get that death certificate amended.
All right. Now, speaking about these damages in the case where the person is alive, how long does it take to get back the or payments that a person used for the COVID test, for example? Because these are quite expensive to get a COVID test.
Well, your damages for taking the COVID test, you'd probably get back on a much quicker scale because you'd be looking at the small claims court.
Yes.
The small claims court seems to have a very quick turnaround time. You don't tend to have major difficulties with the small claims court. So the small claims court is probably your best bet on getting back your damages for the test. If you're looking at more substantial damages, the magistrates court, which you're looking at months. Of course, if you're looking at loss of jobs and loss of earnings and loss of potential earnings, you're looking at high court proceedings. And unfortunately, the turnaround times there are not particularly favorable.
All right. And speaking about laws, how does the law protect the citizens?
Well, you've dealt with your usual delictual claim.
Yeah.
What I mean by a delictual claim is that it's a claim which falls under the category of laws of delict. Now, naturally, you have the regulations and you can obviously go back to the medical council and lodge a complaint. That will give you satisfaction. And there will be disciplinary proceedings against whoever caused your misdiagnosis, but that's not going to help you. That's not going to help you financially recoup whatever you get. The smaller amount, unfortunately, is probably the easier to get and to approach the small claims courts to getting that back. And of course, if it's a loss of job or it's a labor-related issue, you have the CCMA and you have the labor courts, which is also not a lengthy turnaround time and offers a certain amount of protection. The difficulty, of course, arises in that the more complex the matter or the more you lose, the more difficulty you're going to have in recouping. And naturally, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have proof that you were misdiagnosed. You've gone to a second medical practitioner. You have your new test. You have a new medical report as to exactly what went wrong. And yes, those are costly and would fall within the scope of what you now wish to recover for that misdiagnosis.
But now I'm thinking about the misdiagnosis and how would one go around claiming that they've been misdiagnosed? Because once you receive your test results that it's positive, the first thing that comes to your mind is that you're going to go and do social distance and quarantine and do everything necessary that we've been told. So how then do you know that you've been misdiagnosed? I mean, do you go through the 14-day period and then think, okay, maybe perhaps I was misdiagnosed?
The easiest seems to be to get another test, to immediately go and get a second COVID test or attend at a medical facility for that kind of testing, or to go to a doctor immediately and get the if you believe you've been misdiagnosed, you're showing no symptoms, you don't understand how could I possibly have COVID-19, then the best is to assemble that evidence immediately, because in 14 days it's too late. They're going to say that you recovered, that you're no longer positive, and all the rest of it. So the important issue to deal with is to immediately that you feel you've been misdiagnosed and you didn't have COVID, and this was all a mistake, is to get down there and get another test immediately.
And who do you sue? Do you sue the doctor? Do you sue the surgery?
Well, no, I think your best bet to start with is to establish why your doctor feels you have diagnosed you as COVID. Because it may not be the doctor's fault. It may very well be the testing authority. And you've got to establish who is actually the cause of that misdiagnosis. Very likely it's not going to be the doctor, because the doctor can only refer you for the testing. He doesn't do the testing. So it may either be the laboratory that did the testing. If, of course, the doctor drew your blood and he drew your blood with a needle or caused some form of cross-contamination that led to the misdiagnosis. And that could be a difficulty in proving the doctor's to blame. So blaming the doctor himself, I think, is probably going to be a difficult set of circumstances. I think your easiest bet of circumstances is going to be looking at the testing authority. Obviously, if you direct a letter of demand towards the testing authority and you collect the evidence from the testing authority and they are able to prove that your sample was contaminated in some other way, which obviously wouldn't be a bit more costly a process, because obviously you're going to look at that sample and they're going to be looking at what variant you have that they've diagnosed with, why is there a diagnosis in front of them, etc., etc. So tracing the chain of evidence of that particular product is going to be important. Now, it could also be the courier companies. So it is going to be a bit of difficulty, but your best bet is to start with a testing authority.
All right. So, and what about in a case of delayed results? What advice would you give there?
The difficulty with the delayed result is the delays don't seem to be huge at the moment. They seem to be 2 to 3 days. I still think the advice is to get down there and get your second test as soon as possible and get verified as to whether or not you do in fact have COVID, and retracing the steps to see, if you're suspicious and you believe you don't have it. Your best bet is always going to be the retesting as soon as possible. The delayed results obviously will complicate matters, but once again, I think the advice would remain the same.
All right. So thank you so much for your time, June, and have a wonderful
Thank you. Thanks so much. Hey, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Right. As June said, get a second test as soon as possible, because that will determine whether there has been a medical malpractice and you have been misdiagnosed with COVID-19. Obviously, it is going to be difficult for somebody who has passed on and received a death certificate stating that the person died of COVID-19. But people are doing that. People are going and making amends and ensuring that okay, I have a Patricia Basson here has a comment. Tests are not accurate. False positive tests were not made for COVID. Thank you for your comment, Patricia. If anybody has a comment or question, you may leave them in the comment section. There is one thing that I came across. I'm not sure how true that is, but 2 people went for COVID testing and they were in a queue. They had to write their details, and something came up and they could not proceed with the test. So they left with their details at the company or the testing station. And a few days later, they received text messages stating that they were in fact positive for COVID-19. And to them, it came as a surprise because they did not go for tests. So how did their test results come back as negative when they didn't even test to begin with? So there is always something sketchy and dodgy when it comes to this whole thing of testing for COVID-19 and medical malpractice. But as Stacey said, or rather as June said, go and test, go for a second test, and as soon as possible. Also, what bothers me is the fact that if your first test was negative and your second test was negative, then you might just have lost out on those a couple of extra bucks that you could have used for something else. But anyways, it is what it is. You are listening to the mid-morning talk on Salam Media. It is 11:17. If you have any comments, questions, queries, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section or send them to us on WhatsApp. The number is 0617660355. We will be right back after the break.